We left off where if you do the mitzvos with all your heart, with all your soul, the rains will come in the times. You'll bring in the harvest. You'll have pasture land for your animals. You'll eat, you'll be sated. However, at this point, the Torah warns us, you have to be careful. You may be seduced by your hearts. And you'll deviate and you'll serve alien gods. Meaning not only will you serve them in mind and in feeling, but you'll even actually bow to them, meaning you submit to them. The whole concept of bowing is submission. Bowing is always, we say, is negating yourself. Bowing is always usually prostration, fully being prostrated. You'll even come to such a point that you'll be so subservient to the idolatry that you'll feel totally negated to it. You'll believe and understand, and that everything you are is dependent on that deity, on that power. This is what, if you're seduced by your heart, it can even lead to this. The Talmud tells us in Tractate Shabbos, Hashovet Kelim b'chamoso, one who breaks vessels in a fit of rage, Kilo Oved Avodah Zarah. You're the equivalent of an idolater. Person goes and he loses his temper to a point where he loses control. He breaks vessels. He can't contain himself. The Talmud says that person is considered the equivalent of an idolater. Why? So the simple understanding is that when a person's out of control, there's no telling where he could go. People in a fit of rage, God forbid, could even commit murder. When a person's upset, angry, is an expression, people cut off their noses to spite their face. They know when they're acting in this irrational state, they know the consequences. But despite that, because they're angry and upset, they'll do it in either case. The example I will give you. Person is upset with his employer because he feels he should be treated differently. He should be given a bonus or whatever. And he feels because he did not receive what he believed he should receive, the acknowledgement and the extra compensation, he's going to tell off his employer. But you realize, if you tell off your employer and you speak in a certain disrespectful tone, he may terminate you. Then not only you're not going to have the bonus, you're not going to even have your base salary. And you think for a moment, without a base salary, how are you going to support your family? Person says, it doesn't make a difference. I will tell him off in either case. Totally rational. You know that you need the support. You need the position for the base support of your family. But I'm going to tell them off. And they explain it to you. Don't behave irresponsibly. Person says, I'll do it in either case. I'm not concerned. He has to be told off. The person listens and hears the consequences and ramifications of this irresponsible, disrespectful behavior. It doesn't either case. That's called cutting off your nose to spite your face. Why? Because when a person is hurting and he allows it to overwhelm him and overtake him, a person, although he knows the ramification consequences, but it's not internalized. He's not in touch with reality. You're out of touch with reality. A person, Shova Kelim Chamos, a person breaks vessels when he's angry to that point that he can't contain himself. It's as if you're doing idolatry. Why? Because ultimately, in that state of irrationality, You could come and even do idolatry when you're upset. You're upset with God. God forbid. There's no telling where a person could go. That's the simple understanding. How the Talmud explains it differently. We read recently regarding two applications of this. A person who kills inadvertently. So the Torah tells us that since it was not meditated, it was not intentional, it was accidental, he has the ability to flee to a city of refuge. And once he enters the city of refuge, he's under the protection of city of refuge, and therefore the avenger of the blood, the closest relative, is not permitted to kill him. So the city of refuge is a haven of protection. What about a person, the Torah explains, he dislikes his friend, he hates his friend, and due to that, he lies in ambush and he kills his fellow. In that situation, because the murder was intentional, it's an act of murder, if he flees to the city of refuge, the rabbinic court takes the person, removes him, and allows the Goel Adam, the avenger of the blood, to kill him. Because the city of refuge is only for a person who kills accidentally, not a person who kills intentionally. Okay? But when the Torah explained the scenario of this person, he hates his fellow, lies in ambush, and kills his friend. So why did he kill his friend? Ultimately, because he hated him. Why would a person hate? Why does it lead to murder? So Rashi cites the Midrash. There's a principle known as Avera Gores Avera. When you do one sin, it brings to another sin. There's the Torah violation. It says, Lo sisno chichu b'levavecho. You're not permitted to hate your brother, your fellow in your heart. So because he violated the law of hating his fellow, which is a violation of negative commandment, that act created a force which drew him to a more serious level. It started with hate, but that negative force, it's not the hate festered within him. The force, as a result of that transgression of not being permitted to hate your fellow, brought you to commit murder. That's the principle of Aver Gores Avera. And simply we would understand, if a person hates and the hate is not in check, it festers and festers until you just can't control it any longer. And you just explode, and that's what leads to murder. The reason why it's not in check is because Aver Gores Avera. When you do one transgression, it brings you into a more advanced one. Another application we had recently. We read about last week's reading. A person goes, he marries a woman, and marriage is two parts. We do it at one time. You have the betrothal, there's the giving of the ring, and then there's where the husband takes the wife into the home of his home. She enters into his domain. That's called chuppah. There's the ersin and there's the nesuin. So he marries a woman, believing she's a virgin. And then when he consummates the marriage at a later date, he realizes she's not a virgin. What happened? He goes and he brings witnesses that while she was in this married state, she committed adultery. And the witnesses were actually hired and paid to offer false testimony. And they testified falsely against this innocent woman as a result of the husband wanting to slander his wife, even knowing that she's going to be put to death. The parents are called to the court, and they say, look, your daughter, you didn't raise her properly. She committed adultery. The parents says impossible. And the parents went, they did their due diligence, and they found other witnesses that claim that the testimony is false. How do you claim the testimony is false? The second set of witnesses come to court and they say, the first witness that testified that they saw her commit an act of adultery, even though she was forewarned, the testimony cannot be true because at that moment where they claim that they witnessed the act of adultery, they were elsewhere. And because they were elsewhere, it's referred to imonu yisem, they're found to be conspiring witnesses, and being conspiring witnesses, wanting to put innocent people to death, what they conspired to do to the other person, we do to them. So the first witnesses are put to death because they conspired to put an innocent woman to death. And what do you do to the husband? The husband receives lashes, and he has to pay 100 silver coins to the father of the girl. That's what he has to do. But it's when the Torah speaks about this man slandering his wife, that he committed adultery, hiring witnesses to kill her. It says because he despised his wife. He disliked her. After he married her, somehow something came up. He disliked her. It was a hate. Again, why did he go to such length to want to, the equivalent of hiring an assassin to take his wife out? Since he hated her, Aveiro Goris Aveiro, that caused them to hire false witnesses who offered this testimony. It was a verdict that she should put to death. And the result of that, if the parents would have brought other witnesses to prove the witnesses are false, she would have been killed by the court for committing adultery, and she's an innocent woman. So the Gemara says, when one takes vessels and breaks them, the Torah says you're not permitted to be destructive. It's called baltashkis. Something which has value, you can't destroy it just to destroy it, because you're venting your anger. So there's a Torah violation when you are destructive. So when the evil inclination tells you, destroy something that has value, although you're not permitted, and you succumb to that whispering, and you break those vessels, if he tells you to break the vessels, and you violate a negative commandment of being wasteful, what happens tomorrow? He comes and tells you to do something else, and it feeds on itself, and it could go from bad to worse, because again, it seems Aveiro Goris Aveiro. You start at one point, at that point, you go one text and you keep going. So God forbid, ultimately, the evil inclination pushes you up the cliff. He has you bowing to an idol, worshiping a deity. This is the meaning of Hashova Kaleb Chamosa. When you break, a person is angry to the point that he goes and he is wasteful, that he destroys viable vessels, which is totally a negative commandment. Ultimately, he will listen again to something more extreme, until ultimately, even if he tells him to do idolatry, he'll listen to him also. So again, the concept is Aveiro Goris Aveiro. V'chaltav Savoto. You heed God's word. You serve God with all your heart, with all your soul. The rains, the bounty comes. You bring in your harvest. You have pasture land for your flocks, for your herds. You eat, you sate it. You're complacent. You feel fulfilled. And you feel a sense of empowerment. When you feel empowerment, you're already walking a tightrope at that moment. Empowerment could bring to not good things. You become automatically the so-called expert on what is and what's not. I'll give you an example. You have a wealthy person, has tremendous success, out of the ordinary success, and you consult with him in areas which are not even his area of expertise. He has an opinion on everything. If he's become pompous and arrogant due to his success. Calls up his friends, you could talk to him at anything. Because I pretty much see things better than most people. But why? What's the proof? Proof of the pudding is I succeeded so greatly in business. So you're an expert on God. You're an expert on people. An expert at everything. Okay? And when it comes to say, by the way, a person needs a cardiac surgeon, could you please tell me about who's the best in the field? He says, sorry, I can't respond on that one because that's not my area of expertise. But God, what's God and what's not God? What's religion? Is it important to observe the Shabbat? Or should you drive with your Chevrolet limousine on the Shabbos or Yom Kippur? Or you want time out to smoke your cigar, or whatever it is, or do your jogging, Yom Kippur morning. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Why is that? Because I sense health is important. It's something you can't forego. It's something that, and he has a whole theory and a whole approach why it's permitted. It's nonsense. You say to him, how much time have you ever studied, knowing that you have what religion's about? Did you ever open up a Jewish book? No, but it's just my sense. Because as business, I smell the deal. I know whether it's a viable deal or not. I could smell whether it is or not. Okay. The person maybe has a sinus infection. So when you smell things, you smell them, due to the mucus and the infection in your sinuses. That's why you're processing the way you do. You got an infection in your brain. Therefore, your brain is malfunctioning. That's why you're processing it the way you are. Person, he prides himself. He can walk a straight line. All of a sudden, he gets vertigo. He sees the room starting to turn. And the person says, I thought you have such a steady, even keel person. And yet you're falling on your face. Why? Well, the room is turning. So you see, it's not so simple. Something that you took for granted, that you thought all of a sudden, you don't walk that straight line any longer. Everything seems to be spinning before your eyes. But when you feel empowered, and proof is you've succeeded over and over again to the point with nothing is lacking in your life, now you're a target. You're a sitting duck, as they say. You're in the crosshairs of the evil inclination. Now you have to be extra careful. Now's the moment you can be seduced by your heart. And you serve alien guards. Not only will you serve them in your heart, due to that, you'll even do an act openly to actualize that subservience. You bow to it. That the deity is your whole life. You submit, you negate yourself to it, to that degree. So you say to that Jew, do you realize how serious idolatry is? If we would have a Sanhedrin today, a high court, and you would be forewarned, they put you to death for this. So how, in anybody's context, could you justify this? So quote me 16 different passages in the Gemara to explain it the way he understands it. Well, the court really never put anybody to death because they couldn't really prove he was guilty. Yeah, but it has nothing to do with the reality. Because there you have to have irrefutable proof beyond any doubt that he's guilty. But if he's guilty, it's punished by death. So how do you minimize the seriousness of this? But evil inclination could hoodwink you over and over, where you see up is down and down is up. That's the way it is. That's the Shema Pen Yiftel Vavchem. You must be careful. You'll be seduced by your heart. So I explained in the past, the second paragraph speaks about the person who's seduced due to his financial success. The first paragraph, which is Kabbalah Somach Shema, a person who accepts upon himself the yoke of heaven, not only the yoke of mitzvos, but to the point that not only is he loving God, that he's willing to give his heart, his life, but all his pleasures of life, even that is given away. For the sake of Torah and serving God, he's willing to give it all up. The second paragraph was speaking at a different individual. As Reb Shimon Choy says, you're not fully dedicated to God. You're doing everything right, but you're not willing to forego. It's permitted, but to achieve the ultimate, which is by giving up the pleasures of life, permitted pleasures, That you're willing to do. Because you feel you have certain rights, which is okay. But you realize the moment you enter into that mindset that you have certain rights and therefore certain amenities, you're not willing to forego for God, now you become a target. Why? Because if there's any reason why you see yourself as a priority or equal, you have a right to time, the moment you feel you have a right, automatically there's a vulnerability that you can be spoken to and convinced that because you have a right, you have even a right to see things as you see them, which ultimately can lead to idolatry. The first paragraph of the Shema speaks at a person, he gives it all up for God. He leaves no stone unturned. He doesn't miss an opportunity, regardless of the cost factor. He's willing to give it all up, even the amenities of life. That's the intensity of love he has for God. When the evil inclination comes to whisper in his ear, the man says, you know something, you're talking to the wrong guy. There is no point of entry. And because there's no point of entry, as a result of that, there's nobody to talk to. So the whole consideration or possibility, pen yifta labavchem, did you maybe seduced by your heart? There's no seduction. Because when he comes, the person dismisses him immediately. You know, a new restaurant opened here, kosher restaurant, 16 different certifications. And you do a big mitzvah. The person says, you know, I'm not into eating. But there's a new monument they just put up in Central Park, and there's going to be a concert. You mean you're going to miss it? I don't have time for those things. And whatever is presented, he says, I have no time. That's not my thing. The other person sounds interesting. I need a break. You know, I need some level of, to listen to that kind of music. It's kosher music. But when you take that out, you're giving up time, you can be doing other things which have exceptional levels of value within the spiritual realm. It's permitted, but the other person is not giving enough for that. This person will. The moment you give up for yourself, that means every man has his price tag. The evil inclination makes that evaluation, and he pushes the envelope to the nth degree, even that you should do idolatry. We find in regard to the Mishkan, I mentioned this in the past, the name of the Orach Chaim HaKodesh. There were two types of people donated to the Mishkan. There were people who gave out of generosity, the generosity of their hearts, and there were other people who gave because they were inspired by their hearts. He says, what's the difference person who gives due to generosity or a person who gives due to inspiration? You're inspired. Person is approached for a cause, and he's a generous person. So the person gives to a point that he feels that if he goes beyond that point, he's going to be compromising on his own base, and he needs it for himself. Because there's him and there's the cause. So he will give generously up to a point. A person who's inspired by a cause. Once you're inspired, that means you live that cause. All that matters is that cause should be addressed and sufficiently supported. That person will give beyond his means. Even means foregoing something that he needs for himself, he will do it because of the way that he values that cause, because he's inspired. So the two levels of people participated in the building of the Mishkan. Those who were generous, they gave up to a point. Beyond that point, they didn't give. Others, the concept of God dwelling in our midst was so overwhelmingly inspirational. That is the ultimate. Whatever that takes, I'm there. So you can have a person of ordinary income contributing like a rich man. And the man of a rich man, he donates based on his own evaluation of himself, but more than that, he doesn't give more than that. The Rambam and the laws of Talmud Torah who speaks about acquiring the crown of Torah. How does one acquire the crown of Torah? So he says, it's a Mishnah in the 6th parak of Pirkei Avos, Pasmel Tochal, you should eat salt, bread and salt. Mayim b'sur tishter, drink a measured amount of water. Allah or it's tishon, even if you have to sleep on the ground, you sleep on the ground. Even if you have to live a life of deprivation, you live that for the sake of Torah. A person does all these things and meets all these criteria, he merits the crown of Torah. But the Rambam says, Nisha yiso libo liknos keser Torah. A person who's inspired by his heart that he wants to acquire the crown of Torah. It's not a man makes a decision, I want the crown of Torah. Because it's a good thing. Because you realize, since you're in a place where you're not ready to give up many things, it may last a short period of time, but it has no staying power. But a person, the Rambam says, who's inspired by his heart, that he sees the whole value of life is to achieve that. So his life's achievement is, an aspiration is that, to achieve that. Once it's an inspiration, an aspiration, then it's no big deal. Bread, small amount of water, even sleeping on the ground, even living a life of deprivation for that purpose. Because all that matters, life is achieving. It's not sleeping in comfort and having life's amenities. That's what it's about. That's the difference between the first paragraph in the Shema and the second paragraph of the Shema. The first person, life is not to address my comforts. Therefore, I'm willing to give it all up because I see God through that lens. The second person says, of course, I revere him, I love him, I respect him, but up to a point. As a result of that, if you are part of the equation, the evil inclination knows exactly how to play that tune that will seduce you and draw you to a point where you're in a precarious position where, God forbid, you may even cross the line and do idolatry. That's the second paragraph. You know, sometimes we ourselves don't even know ourselves. We don't know who we are. If you live in a very protected environment and you're not exposed to temptation, you toe the line and you just follow that straight line. The moment you go out of your element and your schedule changes, all of a sudden you behave differently. And you yourself didn't even realize how important the environment was and what the basis for your original behavior was versus now. I'll give you an example. Person studies in yeshiva, and he's very committed to his studies. Because he studies within a framework. There's a curriculum, there's a framework of scheduling. You leave the yeshiva environment, all of a sudden, you have other priorities because you're operating now in a different environment. At times, you don't even open up a book to study. Although when you studied in yeshiva, there wasn't a day that you invest a very significant amount of your day in studying. Because since you're exposed to another element, other elements, other influences, you become a different person. You know? The evil inclination knows exactly how to draw you out of your element. It's like, you're in a city of refuge. The avenger of the blood, what does he try to do? To avenge the blood of his relative. He'll call the person in the city of refuge. He says, Chaim, I got a phenomenal bottle of scotch and herring for you. Newly baked kichel. Why don't you come out? We'll drink l'chaim. And he forgets that he better stay under the protection of the city of refuge, otherwise he could be killed. And because he's so drawn after what that peace initiative is, he goes out, gets himself killed, because no longer under the protection of the city of refuge. We have to always evaluate our environment. Leaving this and compromising on the elements of our environment, which are conducive to many good things, and we compromise them for reasons. I'll give you an example. Person who works in an office with people who are observant, and now he's offered a position, double the salary with all kinds of financial incentives, and there He's not going to be able to dabble with a minyan. He's not going to be able to study during the daytime. Come home late at night, and he's going to be exposed to people of other values, even relationships, due to the work responsibility to deal with the opposite sex. And you may have colleagues, and you may have to spend a lot of time interacting with them. You realize there's a certain subliminal effect that relationship could have on you. And all of a sudden, you have a certain positive feeling towards this woman, although she's not your wife. She may not even be Jewish. Well, God forbid, I would never cross the line. But there's a lot before the person crosses the line. I enjoy her laughter, her humor, her warmth, her kind word. But you know what all that is? That's called, even though her interest is not to seduce you, that's not her interest, but it is seduction. And God forbid that seduction could bring to not good things. So you gave up a protected environment for the sake of doubling your salary, but you realize you put your soul in jeopardy because what was important to you is the amenity of life, to live an easier lifestyle, address other comforts of life. And there, the Torah says, you got to be extra careful. When you reach a certain point, you have to be so vigilant and so cognizant of the reality, because you never would know where that could go. Even do idolatry, even to have illicit sexual relations with even a non-Jew, even, God forbid, even with a married woman, adultery, chas v'sholom, God forbid. You never know where it goes. And that's exactly the second paragraph of the Shema. We're talking about that individual who has an interest in addressing his comforts and his desires of life. That person is vulnerable to many bad things unless you take every precaution to keep arm's length for whatever they may be. Okay, we're going to do the Ramchal and Das Tunos. This is the knowing heart. So the title is Chovosenu Lohovin es Hanogas Hashem. It's one's obligation to understand God's workings of existence and how he interacts with existence. And there's a dialogue between the soul and the intellect. And one asks a question and the other responds to the question. The soul is not the intellect. The intellect has the ability to elucidate, to explain. Omran Neshama, Kavosi Ritzoni Lisyashi Valtzas Dvorim, Me'osam Shnema Bahem. He says, my will and my understanding, my desire is to reflect on certain aspects of what it says in the Torah. The Torah tells us, Vashivosa Elavavecho, you should take to heart, Ki Hashem Elokim, that God is the Almighty. So what does that mean? Harehi mi'ikrehi umersenu, shechayv kol odom lidov achrei yidiyosam. So that statement in the Torah communicates that one of the fundamentals of our belief is that a Jew has to pursue and clarify this fact that God is the Almighty. Each person within his own capacity. People have different levels of intellect. But based on your level of intellect, you have to pursue it to your best ability, to take it to your heart, to understand why God is the Almighty. For instance, the way the Vilna Gaon understood this, we can reflect it on Fateri forever. We'll never understand it, the depth and breadth of the Vilna Gaon. But each person with his own capacity, you have to clarify it to your best ability. Why is that true? That's Vashivosa Levavecho. You must take it to heart. I once said that in reality, at one time, whenever you had to resolve an issue, you had all kinds of professional think tanks, and you had the greatest minds researching that area which had to be clarified and come upon. And afterwards, each person would come back with his data and his research information, and they would brainstorm, and they tried to have a semblance of understanding of what that issue is. It's a think tank. And there's a think tank for anything of importance in this world. Today, things have changed a little bit. At one time, there was. The greatest crisis in Judaism is what? Is assimilation. If you have assimilation in the New York area, bordering 60%, in certain parts of the country, 80, 85%, what are we talking about? This is catastrophic. If in fact every Jew takes it to heart and appreciates the seriousness of that, in business, you hire consultants, invest money to succeed financially. Any Jew who's an observant Jew, at least, or values Jews shouldn't assimilate, don't you think we should hire the best, regardless of the financial cost, to come and understand exactly how to tackle this problem? You have a bunch of novices out there who are well-intended, selflessly committed, but you understand, those people don't have the acumen and the resources or the means to see it in that expert level of understanding. And when you approach certain people to contribute to the cause, they said, it's not my cup of tea. But you realize, if you want to put a dent in assimilation, there's no other way to go. He says, well, because I don't think they're doing the job. It's okay. So put up the money, get the people who will do the job responsibly. But that goes into Hashivos L'Levecho. If you're really concerned about it, you take it to heart, you don't leave a stone unturned. But if you do, what does that say? You're living within, I have to be responsible for myself. I can't worry about the world. Even though the fact is, you have to worry about your competitor. You shouldn't take away your customer. And you're worried. And you spend endless amounts of money advertising at many levels to attract that customer. So you worry about the guy out there focusing on what you have. We have something which is infinitely precious. So when we put out that PR or a level of interest to bring people that should have an interest, why not? Proof of the pudding is put your money where your mouth is. And if you don't, you may be well-intended, but you're not there. Omar HaSeichel. So the intellect responds to the soul. Ono panecha modos. What are you intended? What needs clarification? The 13 tenets of Jewish belief. Which one of the 13 do you want to reflect to have greater a level of elucidation? Which one? Amra Neshama, so the Neshama, the soul responds. Every one of the 13 tenets of Jewish belief are irrefutably true, unquestionably true. I don't question the veracity and the truthfulness of them. That's not my issue. Some of them are true. I accept it as truth, and I understand why they're fundamentals. But others, I accept their veracity only because it's part of the tradition. And I don't question. It's the word of God. And therefore, they're truthful. But I don't understand why they're fundamentals and the necessities to be the believing Jew and why it's integral to one's Jewish belief. I accept it is integral because God said so. But I'd like to understand why it's integral. So many of them, I understand their veracity, their truthfulness, and the why it's necessary. And I understand it. its value, but others, I believe its truthfulness and its value, but I don't understand why the value has that value and why it's integral to my belief and my spirituality. That's what the soul is responding to the intellect. Omar Asayim. So the intellect responds again. Ezim umosam lo, loch, ve'ezim v'oram loch. Which do you accept as true, unquestionably true, and which ones do you understand in addition? So those we don't have to talk about, but we have to address the ones that you accept as truth, irrefutable, truthful. However, you want to understand why they're essential and necessary. I'll give you certain examples. It says in the Torah, you must put tefillin on your arm and on your head. Whatever tefillin, whatever they may be, is halachim Sinai. The Torah doesn't articulate and explain exactly what tefillin are. They're called the sign on your arm and frontlets on your head. And you need many interpretation of text, plus you need what we call halachim Sinai to give us an understanding what tefillin are. That they're black, you have to have the shin, all this, to spell the name Shakai. So there are many interplays over here to give us the full understanding of what tefillin are. So after everything's said and done, why do we wear tefillin? Now that we know what tefillin, why do we wear them? So the answer is because it says, Hashem said it should be a sign on your arm and it should be a frontlet on your head. But why? What do I need that for? Why can't I wear a sign on my back? I am a Jew. I'm a believing Jew. I'm a Torah Jew. I'm a mitzvah Jew. Why is that enough? What do I need the tefillin in this leather box with the parchments in it? Why only is that the sign? And why is that integral to my spirituality, to my neshama, to my soul? Why? You know what the answer is? We don't know why. Because God only said so because it's necessary. A person has a bacteria and the pharmaceutical developed an antibiotic. Do you understand why that antibiotic destroys the bacteria? You don't have an understanding, but you know it does. So factually, it will arrest the problem. The Torah says it's a sign on your arm, frontlets on your head. You wear it and you meet all the criteria to fill in. It will make a difference in your life, in your spiritual essence. It will advance it in a very significant way. But why? Because that's just the way it is. Why, when you breathe healthy oxygen, does your body, is it oxygenated? But if you inhale other fumes, it's not the same. Why? Because the way the body was created by God, one needs oxygen, and the blood has to be oxygenated. That's why. But why? The answer is only God knows. Because God chose to create the person in that format that you have to have certain things and other things that don't work. The body can't function in those other areas of behavior. I'm just shifting to an area that we know it's necessary, but we don't have the answers to the whys. We just play within the program to understand if this works, that doesn't work. But why doesn't it work? Because it just doesn't work. Abraham Neshama said, Neshama responds again. Hine b'tzis Hashem, the essence of God, Yuchudo, his unity, Nitzchiyuso, his eternity, V'yoseh chutz min haguf, and he's not in the form of a body, not a physical body, not a spiritual body. Chol mikri haguf, and he's not subject to the effects of a body. Chiddush olam, the world is ex nihilo. Nevuah, God commutes with the human being. Prophecy. Nevuas Moshe. Moshe's prophecy being the ultimate level of prophecy. Torah min hashamayim. Torah being divine. V'ntzchuso shelo tishtane. And its immutability, it will never change. Kol advorei mo'ela ani ma'menes ani mevinisam. All those areas, all those tenets are irrefutably truthful to me, and I have a full understanding why it's necessary to believe in those, and they're integral to our spirituality. And it's Shich Ben Bir, I need no elucidation. On those, I need no elucidation. Avol Hashgocha, but divine providence, Schar V'Onish, reward and punishment. Bias Mashiach, we have to believe in the coming of Mashiach. Utchias HaMesim, ultimately resurrection. Ma'amenes ani vadai v'nei chovas hadas. I believe it without question, because that's the obligation of every Jew. I believe it, and I believe it's necessary. Avoyisi chafetzo lizbor behem svoro sheeshkeben. But I would like to have some level of understanding that I should be put at peace with it. I should put it to rest. Why I understand why they are necessities, and why they are fundamentals of Jewish belief. And only with them do you connect to God. Otherwise, there's a disconnect. Why?